these two words on the screen, challenges, opportunities, they sound, look, feel like they are not quite the same, but I hope that at the end of this presentation, I will be able to illustrate that the two are very, very closely related, and maybe we could even say they have a lot of similarities. I'd like to start with a story today, and there are again a few movie clips that we will be watching. This story, it's not fiction, this is from 1922 in Europe, when it was in the midst of its first great post-war depression. Czechoslovakia's economy, it was in ruins, and its exports were drastically cut, and there was widespread unemployment in the country, and there was inflation, and the currency was devalued by 75%, and people's purchasing power declined. And most businesses, they had a high level of debt, falling incomes, production declined, and there was layoff everywhere. In this situation, Bata Shoes, it was a mid-sized manufacturing company producing footwear. And the company also, just like all the others, suffered very badly. Thomas Bata, he saw his company's exports drop by 75%, and stock was accumulating in the warehouses were overflowing, and there was a lot of pressure to cut down on production, to lay off people. At this time, in this juncture, there was a meeting of the National Manufacturers Association. People had come to discuss the government's policies, see what could be done, what needed to be done. And all the people who attended, everybody who spoke, they felt they were helpless victims of external forces, of government policies. They felt, oh, this world war and the entire economy is ruined, all of Europe was hit, and the entire country's economy is so bad now. What do we do? And they felt helpless. And in all their speeches, this was the recurrent theme. And they were all uniform in condemning the government and in demanding relief, but nobody could actually come up with a solution, propose a solution. Then in the second day of the meeting, it was Thomas Bata's turn to speak. He saw the futility of the government's policy. At the same time, he also saw the futility of what everybody else was doing. This feeling that we are helpless, what do we do? It's all these external forces. The government is not doing anything. It should bail us out. All of these, he saw the futility of going on like this. And so he just decided to take a different stance, to look at all this differently. He said, let's all get together and do something. Let's stop feeling helpless first. Let's stop blaming this person or that group or this situation. Let's take things into our hands. And he made some very dramatic announcements. First he said, I'm not laying off anybody. He was very deeply committed to his employees, their families. Everybody was dependent on him for their survival. And so he said, I'm not laying off a single worker. And second, he said, I'm cutting down the price of my footwear by half. There was stunned silence in the room. Nobody was sure they actually heard him right. Not lay off people, cut down the price by half. And after a pause, after it sunk in, there was derisive laughter. Everybody dismissed him as a lunatic, as a fool. How could he ever survive? There was no way this would be feasible. Bata didn't find it amusing. He went back to his factory and he made a lot of these announcements. He said, look, this is what I've decided. I'm not laying off a single person, but I'm reducing everybody's salary by 40%. At the same time, I am also seeing to it that your families get your food, your clothing, all your basic necessities at 50% of the cost. So everybody's survival is ensured. And then he said we have to cut down on the expenses. And so all kinds of wastage was brought to the absolute minimum. And then he divided his factory into different profit centers, and he incentivized productivity. There was this very powerful opposition from the union, but he said, if you people oppose this, I have to shut down the factory. You all have to go. That is the end of it. So if you keep opposing, there's nothing that can be done. And so he was able to actually overcome that resistance. He went ahead with this, and after that, he launched this national poster campaign where he depicted this huge fist crushing the Czech word that stood for high cost of living. And the public response was overwhelming. Shoe stores that had been empty for months were actually filled with people. There was a time when the police had to be called to control the crowd, to regulate the traffic near the stores, because suddenly this was becoming affordable to everybody. And in 1 week's time, the situation totally changed. Till then, there was a sense of uncertainty, of despair. And suddenly, in 1 week, there was excitement, a sense of purpose. And orders poured in, and the warehouses were almost empty. And in the coming months, Bata was not only able to maintain full employment, but he actually started to expand. When everybody, wrote off the company, wrote off the entire manufacturing sector at that time, this man, in 5 years, the employment in Bata's factories had doubled, and production multiplied 15-fold. The prices of the shoes fell, the wages of the workers increased, and in 6 years' time, actually, Bata, he operated the largest tanneries, the shoemaking factories, and shoe machinery industry on earth. And Czechoslovakia began to lead the world in footwear export. And what had been actually dismissed off as a total hopeless situation, this one man, Thomas Bata, through a number of ways, with the help of a number of people, through many systems that he put in place, he was able to turn around the situation and convert this challenge, this very, very great challenge of crisis. He was not only able to solve the problem, but he was actually able to convert it into an opportunity. Historically, we see that these are not just isolated examples. There have been very many great challenges that have actually gone on to become opportunities. It was after the American Civil War that there was, freedom for the slaves, the African Americans, and then there was unity in the country. We see all the industrialization, even the setting up of the United Nations that came after the World War. So there are a number of such instances that we can see in history, in the history of the world, in history of, companies, even in our own personal lives, when after a challenge, something positive came out of it. And if we study that something positive that came out of it, what went into creating that positive effect, how the people acted, what are the different forces involved, this will be a very great lesson, I believe, in converting a challenge into an opportunity. There's another interesting point that I would actually like to bring to your attention. It is during these crises, it's during these challenging times that we see a lot of these great people suddenly on the scene. It was during the American War of Independence that America saw this constellation of leaders at one point, Washington and Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, all the founding fathers. This has happened during every crisis. During the Second World War, we saw these three very powerful men who were necessary, who were absolutely necessary at that time. And during the Indian independence movement, we had a whole host of leaders, Gandhi and Nehru. They were the right at the top. There were so many such people, Patel and Prasad, and so, many leaders at the national level, and thousands of these men and women at the regional level. These people, they appear on the scene during the time of these huge challenges. And once these challenges are over, we don't see them again. For example, in India, in these 65 years of independence, there has not been another person of Gandhi's stature. It's when these crises come that such people appear. So that's a very interesting relationship between the two. What is it about the challenge? What is it about the crisis? Is it that crises produce these great men and women, or is it something that is there in potential in everybody that this crisis is able to bring out? During normal times when there is no necessity, maybe it's dormant. And it is this problem that wakes it up, shakes up the person and brings this out in people. Triggers. It triggers, okay. So, what is it that actually enables people to rise to the challenge, and what is it that, how is it that our response is energized? This challenge, it seems to come and energize us. What do these challenges do? What do they do to us? It is during these times of, very great challenges that people, men and women, they are motivated and they become capable of taking effort that they would never take during normal times. When everything is fine, when everything is smooth sailing, we are satisfied, we stay at that level. It is only when this very great pressure comes. It's the severe pressure of a challenge that releases the energy, the strength, the aspiration, the resourcefulness in everybody. I would like to play a very short clip now. This is during the Battle of Britain in the Second World War, when Germans under Hitler attacked England in World War II. The Germans expected England to surrender in 6 weeks. They outnumbered Britain in both aircraft and experienced pilots. Germany had 4,000 aircraft and Britain had only 1,600, and Germany was training 800 pilots every week. In England, they were training only 200. The material advantage was with Hitler, but he had not taken into account this enormous psychological determination of Britain and Britain's leader. So I would like to play a short clip now which shows Winston Churchill addressing his people, and in which he says, "We shall not surrender." He simply announces that we are not going to surrender. During air raids, when the Germans were bombing, he would go to the terrace and he would stand there shaking his fists at the German bombers. And his patriotism, his sense of honor, his courage, his sense of sacrifice, it resonated with all the Indian people, with all the English people, and they backed him totally. In another of his speeches, he said, "I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, sweat and tears. Now what more can a leader offer?" And all the people, all the English people were willing to follow him. And all the odds were against Britain. They were under-equipped, undermanned. But in 3 months, the Germans, they gave up. Britain, even if we see the casualties, the losses in the war, Britain lost some 1,000 aircraft and Germany close to 2,000. And over 500 British airmen lost their lives, and the German losses were 5 times greater. It is the pressure of the situation that makes people rise to the occasion. It is the crisis that releases the energy in people. It makes giants and leaders of men and women. Challenges making us resourceful. This is something that we have occurs even in fiction and movies. We see there are books written like Swiss Family Robinson, Robinson Crusoe, where somebody gets stranded on an island and they come up with so many different ideas. There was this movie Castaway in which this man who is on an island, he thinks of things that he would not have been able to think of if everything had been fine, normal with him. So these are examples where the resourcefulness comes out during a problem at a much larger scale. Our courage, our strength, all this energy, all of this comes out in the face of a huge crisis. There is another thing that challenges do to us. They make us change our attitudes. new opportunities open up when there is a change in this attitude, when everybody in Czechoslovakia, they were saying, oh no, there's nothing that can be done. The same problem, it makes one person feel, why should we continue saying this? Why cannot we think differently? Let's try and do something. This feeling of helplessness, let's just shed it and see if something else can be done. There are many people who actually feel later on, after the problem was solved, that it was only because of the problem that they were actually able to make so much progress. There have been cases in history, even Steve Jobs, when he was thrown out of Apple, later on he said, it was that public humiliation, it was that problem that actually forced him to correct his mistakes, to learn from them, and to improve himself. So very often it is the problem which actually helps us shed some of the attitudes which create the problem. And whenever there is any resistance to change, to progress, sometimes the challenge, the new situation, it breaks all these resistances. When the union told Thomas Bata, no, we don't agree to this, a 40% cut, what's this? No. He was able to say, we are making this change. If we do not make it, all of you can go home tomorrow. So sometimes it is this very huge challenge that forces, that enables the leaders to brush away all these resistances. Sometimes many of our thoughts, attitudes, actions, all these entrenched patterns, they cause the problem. And it is very often a crisis that enables the revamping of this entire structure. The pressure of the crisis, it can break down all the resistances, or it can be used by one person, the one man or woman who is leading this change, to brush away all of these resistances and go on with the change. Now all these stories about Winston Churchill and about Thomas Bata and Steve Jobs, these are all great success stories. These, we could also say, are one in a million. These are people who have taken a challenge, who have converted it into an opportunity. There is this case of Yousafzai Malala, the Pakistani girl. She did face problems. There was a crisis and she was able to come out of it. She's transformed not only her own life, but the lives of thousands of other people all over the world. She's brought awareness to this cause of girls' education worldwide, especially in places like where she is from. But what about all of those other people? It is not every company in Czechoslovakia that was able to turn around like Bata shows it. What about all the other people who are still not able to get an education? Steve Jobs and Apple, they are right at the top, but what about all the others? We're talking about one in a million when we talk about it. But the lesson that these people have taught, that we can learn from these, can be emulated by all the other 1 million. Why should it be that it is only this one person who does this? Every one of us can learn from this. What did they do? What is it that differentiates this one person from all the other people who are not able to convert the challenge into an opportunity? It is not everybody who is able to, solve the problem and go on to create an opportunity from this. Many people succumb to this pressure. Many people fail. When a crisis comes, many people just get destroyed. So what is it that differentiates all of these people who succumb to this challenge, to this problem, and those who rise above it, who solve it, and who go on to make progress, individual and for the collective? There must be something that differentiates these people from the rest. And if we find out what that is, if we learn, then maybe everybody can do the same. There is this concept in the martial arts. You take the momentum from the attack of the opponent and you redirect it. Use it against the same opponent. You redirect the energy. When the problem comes, it creates this very, very huge pressure. The same pressure, it can be used, it can be redirected against the problem, against whatever is causing the problem. Lee Iacocca, turned around Chrysler Corporation, the car manufacturer, when it looked like it was about to sink. He was able to turn it around. He had just been fired from Ford and he took on this challenge and he said, I learned to plow my anger and my energy into something positive. For him it was anger, it could be despair, it could be frustration, it could be a huge threat from somebody, whatever it is. This energy that comes from it, it can be plowed into something positive. So this energy can be redirected. This particular word energy actually brings to mind one instance which recently occurred in India, which is still being practiced. There was this problem with forest fires that were caused in the Himalayan mountain slopes because of these dry pine needles that fall from the trees. They often create forest fires affecting the ecology, affecting the people there. And so one man there, a resident there, he came up with this idea. He collected all these dry pine needles and he himself developed a kind of furnace with some help. And he burnt all these pine needles. From that he was able to convert that into electricity. And so the problem was solved. There was no more forest fire from these needles. And then he employed women in these villages on these mountain slopes to collect all these pine needles. So that provided employment for a lot of people. He trained some of the youth in these villages to operate these furnaces. All of these needed people to operate them, to maintain them. So some of those people got some education, training, and they started operating this. And then this actually provided enough electricity to light up a village. So the villages that did not have electricity before, they were able to get electricity from that. And then that goes on to create so much more. So actually this problem of forest fire that came from these dry pine needles, it was actually not only solved, but it was converted into something so much more positive, out of which many people benefited. Another is, there is always an opportunity everywhere in everything. This Lee Iacocca, when he was in college, his dream was to work in Ford. He owned a Ford car, and every time he went up a slope and the car stalled when he shifted gears, he said, they need me in Ford. A company that produces cars like this can definitely do with some help. So it's just a way of looking. Maybe you can curse the car, you can curse the car company or your luck. Or you can look at the opportunity. This is one small humorous example, but there are opportunities like this in everything. After the Second World War, there was huge, there were so many problems in Japan, and one of them was this gasoline shortage. And so one man, he came up with this idea. He designed an engine that worked on kerosene and he fixed it to his cycle. Seeing this, his friends said, why don't you do something like this for us? And so he started doing it at a much larger level, and that became the Honda Corporation. So no matter what the problem is, maybe there is an opportunity in it. And when we go actually look for it, it will be visible. There is one of Thomas Alva Edison's quotes, opportunity is missed by most people because it is dressed in overalls and looks like work. So sometimes we miss it because it doesn't look like we think it will be. Just because it is dressed in overalls, it looks like work, it still is an opportunity. And people who learn from mistakes and decide not to repeat it, they are also the winners. And this is also one of the critical elements that determine those who win from those who succumb to the pressure. Another of Thomas Edison's quotes is, I have not failed, I have just found 10,000 ways that don't work. And creativity can always come up with solutions and with great ideas. There is this saying that life giving one lemons, life giving one problems. And there is a different way of looking at it. It said, when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. Now there is an even modern twist to it. When life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. You take the seeds from the lemon and you plant an orchard, and then you can make more lemonade and you start a franchise. So there is absolutely no limit to what we can do when there is creativity. Any problem that can be taken. One small but still very striking example is when this railway company in Japan Railways East, it started drilling a long tunnel under a mountain, spending millions. The tunnel was stuck, but then it encountered this problem of water seepage. They were unable to do anything to stop this water seepage that was coming from the melting snow on this mountain. The water was of very great purity. It was very tasty. It was not what they needed. So one of the workers there, he suggested, why don't we bottle this water and sell it? It's so good. And actually that is exactly what the company did. And in 10 years, their sales reached 50 million a year. They had all these stalls in their railway stations, and then so they started selling this bottled water there. And then they added iced tea and many products. So all of this started from a problem. In this tunnel, there was this water that was seeping from the melting snow. It was not what they wanted, but when you look at it differently, when you think creatively, this we see today. There are so many such problems that we face today. Maybe just looking at it differently will help us not only solve it, but actually convert it into an opportunity. We see this in different ways. Today we talk about global warming and the melting polar ice caps and the rising sea levels. That is triggering a lot of research into alternative energy, solar power and wind power and hydroelectricity. So maybe out of all this, some great progress will come. I would like to conclude with another short story and another movie clip. This story is about the Green Revolution in India. During the 1960s, because of better health facilities and vaccination and life-saving drugs, the population of India expanded very greatly. So there was, perennial food shortage. And this food shortage was always met by, massive imports of food at concessional prices from the US. And in the 1960s, mid-1960s, the problem was aggravated by consecutive years of drought. And it reached a point where there was food in the country only for the next 2 weeks. There was nothing in the pipeline. As it is, at that time, the country was leading what was called a ship-to-mouth existence. The ships that brought the food from the US would go straight to the people. But after the supply of 2 weeks, there was nothing else in the pipeline. And FAO estimated that 10 million lives could be lost in the country. So it was in this situation in 1966 that the Prime Minister Shastri asked this, he was a freedom fighter and then he became a statesman, C. Subramanian, or CS for short, to take up this portfolio of food and agriculture. So normally taking this portfolio was equal to ending one's career because all the previous ministers had failed. But this man, he was from a agricultural family. He took this up and he proposed importing these hybrid seeds from Mexico. They had just been developed, tested by Dr. Norman Borlaug, who went on to get the Nobel Prize. And he said, let us import these seeds from there. There was no time to bring it by ship, and so it had to be flown in by air. And there was a lot of opposition from everybody. The farmers said, no, we won't try anything new. The people will not eat this. The wheat is the wrong size and shape and color. The agricultural scientists said this won't work out in India. The opposition actually staged over 1,000 demonstrations in the country opposing this. There was a lot of opposition from all sides, but the crisis was so great that CS went ahead and brushed aside all of this and said, we have to do this. If we are to avert this catastrophe of losing 10 million people in the country, these seeds were brought, and it was a huge success. And then he went on to do so many things. It was because of this crisis that people woke up. He set up the food corporation where food in surplus areas could be bought so that the farmers who were producing surplus did not lose because of prices getting lowered, and these were sold at deficit areas, and then the entire agricultural education in the country was revamped, and a lot of these changes took place, and because of these crops, fertilizer industry, the pesticide industry, irrigation industry, all of these actually grew, and the dams had to be built, and this also resulted in hydroelectric energy, and this led to industrialization. This just went on and on and on. So what started off as a famine, as an impending famine, a huge catastrophe that would result in the loss of 10 millions, that problem was averted, and because of this massive effort that was taken by one man and all of the organizations that he set up at that time to solve the problem, it went on to actually convert India from from leading a ship-to-mouth existence to actually becoming not only self-sufficient, but it began to export food. So we often see that, it is the greatest challenge that leads to these greatest human achievements. So maybe it is our response that determines the result. There were people in the meeting in this National Manufacturers Association that said nothing can be done, or the government is not doing anything. That was an attitude. Another attitude is, let's try and see what can be done. So maybe it is our attitude that determines whether the result is positive or negative. So, is it possible that all challenges have concealed opportunities behind them? We face so many such challenges today. In fact, all of these stories that I just mentioned now, the Green Revolution and Thomas Barker and Jobs and Churchill, these have a successful, a positive ending. But when we look at the challenges that we face today, can we apply the same lessons? Can we apply the same principles and see if all of these can actually also be converted into opportunities? I would like to end with another short story and a movie clip. This is historical, but it's also been immortalized by Shakespeare in his Henry V. It was at the Battle of Agincourt, when it was during the 100-Year War. England, fought France, and this was in northern France, in this place named Agincourt. Henry V and his army, they were fighting a numerically superior French force. The English army, they had very little food. They had marched for 260 miles in 3 weeks. They were tired, they were hungry, they were weak, and they were facing these Frenchmen who were well equipped, well trained. In fact, it was said that during this, just before the start of this battle, the French nobles, they were all competing to be in the front line. They wanted to be the ones who would defeat the British. They outnumbered the English forces 5-1. So they were numerically superior. They were superior in every way. They were better trained. The archers were so much better. But we'll just watch the clip now. In spite of these great odds, the king was able to arouse the people to go on and to defeat the French in spite of all these odds. And the results that we see later on were incredible.
I think I mentioned earlier, Toynbee has the concept of, when he studied civilizations in his theory of history, one of his primary premises was civilizations grow by meeting challenges successfully, challenge and response. So it's a macro level of what Janani was telling us. To me, and of course the story I told yesterday of Lincoln is the same story. America just didn't survive the Civil War. They didn't just abolish slavery. The country emerged much stronger because it had been through that conflict and was able to impose a strong federal government, which we know how difficult that is to do when it's not there. To me, the most central message, this has a really significant, great significance for us, not just because These are great rare events. But in looking at a science of society, it just shows how important the subjective reality is, the subjective conditions are. But we simply cannot deal with society as if it's an objective reality. If with the French outnumber them 5-1, or the German Air Force outnumbered the British 3 or 4-1, those things have entirely different significance because we're human beings and because we're capable of a change in perception, a change in attitude, and an effort which simply can't be measured in quantitative terms. So for me, this raises a lot of questions, maybe more questions than answers, but profound questions that have to be taken into account if we're trying to understand how society works and especially how it develops and evolves. Other comments, questions? What did you?
Just a prediction. I think that the passage of time, you spoke about Churchill and you spoke about King Henry. I think that the passage of time, in that era, there was a lot of patriotism, there was a code of conduct, there was a code of morals, and England was very monotonous. I think that the passage of time has eroded a lot of that. And so it's a bit difficult to compare that era to where we live now. One typical example is Mumbai. In Mumbai, they're destroying, I made to believe, and you can clarify me, most of the slums in order to make way for high-rise buildings. So if we apply your principle to Mumbai, then surely something could have been done about that. With the passage of time, the world's population has increased, commodities are scarce, people have become selfish, England is no longer homogeneous. If you think of Blair and the way he started off as a trade unionist and then supported Iraq, very different to King Henry and to Churchill. And I think that is the problem we sit with today. That's one of the big challenges that we need to address. I've made a note, that passage of time, I mean, we've just become a very selfish people, really. I also just want to add very briefly that I really do believe that behind every single challenge, there's an opportunity. But it depends on who gets that opportunity. That's very important. Who gets that opportunity? Is it in the interest of humankind, or is it in the interest of the person not here?
Yes, I think in both the points that you made, the significance of values comes out very clearly, what Alberto has been mentioning. Yes. Yes.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. Interesting. Again, you make me think, which is a good thing again. At least I think it is a good thing. So, in answer to your question, of course, all challenges have concealed opportunities. What worries me is that we have to build narratives very different from the narratives you are showing. Of course, we are all appealed by what you show in this movie. This movie is cats because the movies were good, the actors were good, the text is impressive, etc. But these two examples, as well as the one of Gladiator, are examples of narratives of war. So the classical epic narrative, which of course mobilizes people. We are all of us are formed by, so you identify easily with one, but we need something else. And in particular, we need to forget the narratives of war. because we have too much of that in the history of the world. No, thank you, no more narrative of war. So we have two very important problems. One is to forget about the narrative of war when we deal with geopolitics, where war in the literal sense of the term takes place. Because if not, we will have war. And there are enough reasons and examples, quite obviously we discussed some of them yesterday and the day before at dinner. There are so many examples of how things which are happening could very easily go to war if we keep installed in the brilliant mobilization, which mobilizes so much in this epic of war. The epic of war, and they are the bad, and we are the good ones, and we have to destroy them. We have to forget about that in geopolitics. But the other aspect I see is that there is no way to frame the challenge we really have. I think there is no way to frame the challenge we really have. I mean, geopolitical challenges are also real challenges. But the challenge, for instance, of sustainability of our lifestyles and how we balance the development, the material development of the rest of the world with the extra development of the rich world, so that everybody finds a decent way of life on this planet and we do not destroy the planet. So the challenge of sustainability, it is much more complex than something which could be framed between this is bad and this is good, and we have to destroy this to get out of this challenge. So the challenge in itself is much more complex in that case, and I see no way of framing that in the way of in the epic of war.
Yeah, Alberto, and then
very good, Janani, thank you. You show two examples, researched by social psychology, sociology, in which a group of people, thanks to a charismatic leader, stop fear or interpersonal aggressivity to focalize all the energy to face a common enemy. Similar things happen also in disaster. A volcano, a flooding, and I was in the flooding of Florence. One of the good things about that destruction was that the Florentines, many people from outside, were, brother and sister.
And we heard that about Bosnia a few months ago.
Absolutely. Now, I always, stimulated by Carlos' opinions. And I'm, posing you a question. After what he said that, I am also reminded of other charismatic leaders. To mind comes Mandela, Gandhi, Buddha, Jesus Christ, although I've never met them personally. That seems, through what we know about history, etc., actually to have one bigger charismatic capacity to promote a social dynamics that is much more rare, that people are not facing a common enemy, natural or the bad people, but actually, I'm reminded of Gandhi, which I read some, that they say, I'm gonna starve myself to death if you Hindu and Muslim keep killing each other. Wow, that's even more powerful than say all together to kill the enemy, all together to contrast a natural catastrophe. Now, my question to you is, do you see some commonality, but also some differences on people that are even able to facilitate people stopping using and wasting the energy in their bickering and selfish behavior, and actually consider their enemies as brother, because that is even a higher energy, and more powerful energy, in my opinion.
Yes. That point actually was beautiful. First address what Carla said about the examples of war that I used on all three occasions. Yes. The movie clips for war, but yesterday's was mainly for the systems, the specialization, the hierarchy. It just so turned out that it was an army, and these two that I have shown, it was not so much Churchill saying let us all fight, but the way he was able to bring out the courage in them. It was in that situation, it was the German Air Force or Army. The case of the Green Revolution, question of Thomas Bata or Steve Jobs going on to, expand Apple, all of these show that it is not only in battle that the courage does come out, though it just so happened that the three video clips talk about war. And about your point, actually, that was beautiful. Gandhiji, he did create mass movements. He said boycott all British goods, and everybody threw away or burned the British goods. He said let's all just go make salt. In that, I think what he did was great. It was brilliant, actually. He did not say let us go fight the British. In fact, one of his main points was non-violence. And so he said, let us all go to the coast and let us make salt. And this way we will disregard the British rule. But yes, when he said, I am going to starve myself unless you both stop fighting, that transcended even that. It was a much greater self-sacrifice. Yes.
I think just to emphasize, I think the Green Revolution example also addresses your point, because it's contemporary. It was not a battle against, it was a battle for the country. This was not at the time, there was not a strong government or strong leadership. C. Subramaniam was not a charismatic politician. He really saw a need and rose to the challenge. And when he announced to the parliament that his goal was food self-sufficiency, at a time when India was heavily dependent on foreign aid, especially from the United States, they used to call the food minister the PL 480 minister, because Public Law 480 was the law by which the U.S. was giving food aid, and the money was being spent on charitable, when they finally paid it, it was being spent on charitable activities. And the idea at that time that India could become food self-sufficient was just preposterous. They laughed at him. And yet within 5 years, the country started, I was there, by the time they started exporting food, I was there, and I remember the outrage from the European Union. What is it? We've been giving you all this food aid and now we're giving it away to other people? No, we're not taking your food aid anymore. We stopped 2 years ago. This is our food we're producing and we're giving it to others who need it. So I think she used the dramatic clips because they really bring out that potential. Of course, JFK's moon launch is another example. When he announced when I was in high school, when he announced that within 10 years we're going to land a man on the moon and bring him back again, it was preposterous. They didn't have the technology to get to the moon, but the real problem was how are you going to ever get him off the moon and get him back to Earth? And if you look at it, it's a real parallel to Green Revolution, because they had 45,000 different institutions were involved in this effort. It wasn't a one-man, just speaking heroically. It was an institutionalized effort, which, as you said, Green Revolution was too.
Just a general point, you had earlier stressed the salience in a new science society of the subjectivity of the individual. And the paper brings that out, but it's not something we adequately understand as a social construction, a psychosocial construction. But on the other hand, what conventional wisdom seems to bring in the guise of science is that when you have scientific objectivity, you also carry the element of determinism. so that you don't really see a choice. Here's the science, the Earth is going to be destroyed by climate warming, and that's it. There isn't any other way to...
Assuming we can't change, we won't change.
On the other hand, the element of subjectivity, not necessarily as adequately understood, would seem to be depending on how you use it, a dramatic exception to the conventionality of scientific objectivity. That's an important issue that needs further exploration. This is a bit anecdotal, and there are narratives that make it easier to understand because narratives are important to understanding. But we still have to explain the role of human subjectivity. Do we fully understand creative potentiality? Do we understand systems of identity can be changed and even changed dramatically, and so forth? So I think those are quite open questions because we've had a long-standing battle between objectivity, with the implicit deterministic components of it, and subjectivity, which shapes and unsettles the certitude of scientific objectivity.
Chapter, I agree with Winston that we need to consider this combination between subjectivity of human being and objective conditions that are active. They do not have, with the circumstances which really helps these creatures to go up later on. And I have little sub-chapter to add to the Green Revolution, which is close to me. I mean, my previous university, so the Professor Brunner developed these genetic materials, and they were also laughing of him. They didn't believe that he could develop such high harvest, from this combination, and many companies were against. So he was fighting for funding for this. So it was really his determination to produce these hybrids, because the scientific work was, as usual, which is normal. It was divided. This is why we have here discussion, Some of us are for, some against, and this is why we are exploring further, getting better argument. But also he was the type of fighter and the determined guy, and there was an excellent combination between science and him and Indian leaders, and so to succeed. So it's a good combination of academia and politicians.
Janani mentioned the example of Chrysler. I remember in 1978 when Iacocca became the president of Chrysler, the predictions of Wall Street were unanimous. They were looking at the objective facts. The objective facts was Chrysler came to the point that they had only $10 million in the bank. Now I'd be happy to come to that point of having $10 million in the bank, but their daily expenditure was $50 million at that time. And the predictions were unanimous that within 6 months this company will be out of business. And yet within the next 3 years, they earned more money than they had earned in 59 years of their existence. So that tells us this is not a fluke. In fact, I think I mentioned on Monday, when Jobs came back to Apple, Michael Dell, in his infinite experience as the founder of a very impressive company, said my advice to Steve Jobs is to close the company and give whatever assets, return money to the shareholders. And within 8-10 years, it was the most valuable company in the history of the world. So this is not from an uninformed source. I'm going back to what you said, because I just had an experience on that line in India. If you see what happened in India after the independence movement, you had a complete fragmentation there was a homogeneity during the freedom movement. There's no doubt. It's not the way it looks now. It wasn't so homogeneous. There were a lot of people up until the end who believed India shouldn't leave the British. It was a privilege to be part of the jewel in the crown, and we can't manage by ourselves. And I think last week I mentioned the same was true of the American Revolution. There was a vast portion of the population that didn't want to be separate from England. In fact, they were siding with the British and profiteering from the American Revolution, earning big money, selling things to the British army while the American troops were starving to death and didn't even have shoes. So I've watched in the last 50 years in India, that homogeneity breaking down into more and more of regional differences and regional aspirations, not necessarily fighting each other, but each voting and electing their own people, so it became more and more difficult to get a national government except through coalition. And I was surprised what happened 3 months ago now in the elections, because for the first time in 30 years, the people elected a national leader and a national party with a more than 2/3 majority, which we thought that was the history of the past. You could never see a single party, in the leadership role again. So maybe these are not irreversible directions. India experienced the problems you have when you don't have enough national unity. They drifted for a long time in the absence of, a strong central government. And so I think there are cycles to this. So to say there was, in retrospect, it looks like there was homogeneity in England at the time of Henry V. But I think the historical record would show that not only the French laughed at him and took him lightly as a young kid who was mostly in the taverns, but even in Britain, there were a lot of people who thought they should be the king instead. So I think, no doubt there are differences in situation, but I'm not, and they change over time, but I'm not sure it's like all the great events have been of the past. And maybe you're right in the sense that the charismatic leader, is more rare today, but through organization, maybe the role today is being more played by organizations than individual leaders. But the principle may still be true.
I think that I observed that there was a part of solidarity movement, and
you were part of it.
I observed how we build the organization, from 0 to 10, or when from the police security forces, there were even 11 million of solidarity members, because they have better evidence than we. And then, when martial law was imposed, the unity started to disappear. Why? I mean, that if you have simple goal, clear, to get independent trade union as we have, this is some 10 postulates, It's easy to unite. If you move to different states, if you start ruling, you have much complex issue or more challenges to face. You have different strategies, different tactics. Besides that, you got a war, and then there is time for different egos. Well, why I'm not entitled as Provenza, Uran, and so there are many challenges, because they were already in power. So this is the situation, we, after martial law, the trade union, I remember we had, by the way, I got a lot of experience from that one thing, because we were collecting fees, and distributing underground newspaper during martial law. And I remember many people say, okay, thank you, but it's too dangerous. I don't know. It was normal. We didn't, encourage people whose families and so on. There were some risk takers and some more. But so more complex conditions in general create the type of diversity and destruction of the monolith situation, and it's a normal process. And the higher we go, the bigger pie to share, so the more conflict and interest. So that was amazing. I think that my understanding of India situation was not only a charismatic character, personality, but also how many decades of perpetuating mismanagement of national resources by the Congress Party. Period. They just, the capital, initial capital coming from, Gandhi, just evaporate. Period. People were fed up with this. And this is something, what was the vacuum? Political vacuum. And then fill this gap. So by the way, and then talking about vacuum and gaps, I want you to understand me well. I was not talking about the third way. I was talking about network as filling the gap between market inefficiency and government inefficiency. I think that we need to have combination of all three, okay? So to be, even, I was influenced by leaders, Tashi earlier, so these authors of the third way, but, and this is what we need to have, and then the sector could expand and so on. And great presentation.
Very good point.
Yes. Online.
A question online? Ashok?
Janani, I have two comments to make about your presentation.
Yes.
I would like to know what you mean. You said there is an example from the martial arts where you receive an opponent's attack and kind of redirect it against the same person.
Yes.
I don't know what that means.
Okay.
Secondly, you are focusing on turning challenges into opportunities. But I am aware of another equally possible outcome, which is an opportunity that is mismanaged can turn into a big problem.
Yes. Yes.
Is it possible that a big global problem right now that is affecting everybody is actually the result of a mismanaged opportunity?
Okay.
For example, the Zimbabwe, they got independence and it was hailed as a big victory. But the leaders who took over the reins of power in Zimbabwe, they mismanaged the economy so badly.
Okay.
The nation developed a runaway inflation of 1,000,000% or more. That is, they got independence, but they didn't know how to use that independence. They kind of governed the country in a wild manner, resulting in a runaway inflation. That is a local problem, but the same tendency can be seen at a global scale. Where some big global problem affecting all of us is actually the result of a dim-witted mismanagement of an opportunity.
Okay, thank you.
What was he saying?
Zimbabwe.
Zimbabwe.
The first point was, how do you, in martial law, how is the force of the enemy's attack taken and converted to be used against this? This actually reminded me of Professor Kohli's explanation, the way he concluded his first presentation. Like in a dance, you don't actually try to enforce your way, you go along with the move, and that results in a very graceful movement. And so when we try to take all the impact of the blow, it hits us. But when we move along with it, it doesn't hit us, and it can be turned around and sent back to the opponent. This is more of a metaphorical way of explaining how we can sometimes take the problem, the energy that is there in the problem. It's negative, but it can be turned around, like plowed back into it. Instead of letting it hurt us, it can be used to focus on the solution. Like in the example that I gave of the forest fires that were resulting from these dry pine needles. The same thing that is creating the problem can instead be used to create an opportunity. And the second point, yes, that's a very, very large topic. How challenge can be converted into an opportunity. In the same way, an opportunity can also be converted into a challenge. And so the question was like, problems that we have today, are they all there because they actually came as opportunities, and our mismanagement and the way we handled it actually converted into a challenge? And the example given was Zimbabwe. When it attained independence, it looked like it was a huge opportunity, but then misgovernance resulted in problems for the country. So
we could add to that the problems we're having today in Ukraine and with Russia also. We missed a great opportunity after the end of the Cold War. Well, I think it's a good point. I think it goes back to your original statement when you started. You wanted to convince us that opportunities and challenges are really not opposites.
right.
They depend on our response to a situation, whether it's one or the other. So Ashok's given a good example to illustrate. Anyone else? Any other comments?
Can I ask a last question?
Yes.
I've been working a long time in motivation psychology to empower women to have the number of children they decide to have. And we know that if you want to deal with the population, overpopulation, the best measure is to empower women and to give them access to education. Immediately, that increases the number of children. Now, I want to put together a great achievement, the green revolution in India, which is also, to my eyes, a great achievement of having more to eat, so nobody dies of starvation. And we have been producing, more to eat, but not all the organizations have a desirable results, because the fact that there is more to eat, and I would agree that it's a tragedy that human capital is wasted, in the sense that maybe has made people blind again for very many psychological and social construction reasons that we are multiplying. So not only people are eating many more, but many more continue to die of starvation. And the trickle of population, a friend of mine has shown a slide that when the plague infects a human organism, it's the same identical growth rhythm of overpopulation of our planet. So, in a sense, we have become, as humans, the plague of this planet, and burning and destroying resources. And in a sense, when we don't have a global vision, then we might be very successful in one dimension, and unwittingly, perhaps, have some, negative example. I don't know if this also, if we separate knowledge and even accomplishment without having the big picture, we might see something in different lights, because everything is affected. There is no single phenomenon that doesn't affect the planet, so to speak.
Yes, in fact, this problem itself, what was there before the Green Revolution, actually happened because of better health care, vaccination, life-saving drugs. This resulted in the sudden rise in population. So out of something good came this consequence.
There's a problem which then required another
solution.
So you're right, of course. Any example has to be seen in the wider.
And I'm reminded that, Pueblo Indians and other Native Americans developed resilience. We're talking about resilience, it's good. Well, it's good until it's good. They developed a way of surviving, eating the meager, food on their disposition, and developing genetically the capacity to absorb so-called food. Nowadays, if you go in the States, you see these kids and parents like this, and they die around 35, 40, because their advantage in a plant food, where food is all over in the States, something that is good news is terrible news,
Not
so
only
contextual.
today there's an epidemic of diabetes in India because there's abundance of food and people are eating more. So you're right, of course.
According to latest report, there is the same number of obese as starving people worldwide. Wow. Which is really very crazy balance.
What if one was referring to, and it's not really relevant, the fact that Monsanto is monopolizing food in Africa?
Yeah.
So not only do you monopolize every other industry and monopolize what you eat, you depend on another country for what you eat.
Yeah. I just wanted to remind you what our friend, several of us, Cleveland used to say, where is the real leadership appeal? He used the term, nobody in charge. So the crisis situation. And so this is exactly the situation, you need to take a charge. People are because of difficult circumstances, withdrawing, waiting, maybe things in happen, and then, take the charge. Convert, this is a great message, I'm telling for years also my students, converting crisis into opportunity. So, one of the major abilities what such leaders should have is the ability to rephrase, to articulate in the language, the verbiage, which show the opportunity, which mobilize people. And this is really hard. We heard what Christian was telling you, Frank Christian. So, how church presented this, one particular Christian was really. This is a very difficult message, and not many are able to do, but the crisis is the perfect opportunity for starting new. And it's in the leadership about. And I think that Harald will be happy to see this session, because he was always telling us about this global university, freedom of information and free information. He was always arguing against commercialization of information and so on. Anyway, thank you.
I think your earlier comments also, I agree with everything, but I think your earlier comments also raised a very important point, that this is the challenges we face today, the challenges even a company faces, are much more complex than a military situation. Yeah. And in fact, that applies also to the Indian freedom movement. The Indian freedom movement, they were able to all agree on a strategy and all work together. But the moment India became free, you had the challenge of how to make India prosperous.
Exactly.
And you know, you can have an army to fight a war, but when you want to make a nation prosperous, the whole nation has to fight. Everybody has to get skills. Everybody has to be organized. And it's a much greater challenge. And maybe one way to look at the problems that we're dealing with in the new paradigm is that our challenges now are global because we are not organized at that level. We're working at that level, but we're not organized at that level. The nation state has shown us how we can organize, for better or worse, the life at a one level, but we don't have the institutions or the experience for how we organize at the global level, and therefore we've got these multiple challenges. But there's certainly a lot we can learn from our successes and failures at the earlier levels as well. Okay. Again, I'd just like to thank Janani, not just for this presentation, but this is actually her 10th presentation in 11 days. She came here. She arrived here on September 23rd, I think it was, right? And was taught every day last week, and now the first 3 days this week, because this afternoon she's going back to India via Finland. So we wish you a very successful journey, and thanks so much for coming.
Thank you.